In 2026, two men living just a few hours apart in North Carolina appeared to be heading toward completely different futures. Jake lived outside Charlotte. He was 30 years old and worked in software sales. Between commissions and bonuses, he earned around $130,000 a year. Friends admired his success. Family members talked about how well he was doing. On social media, his life looked exactly how many Americans imagined success should look. 3 hours away in Raleigh, Mike was also 30. He worked as a project manager for a manufacturing company and earned about $85,000 a year. He wasn't struggling, but nobody would have called him wealthy. He drove an older Toyota Camry. He lived a quieter life. And if you met both men in 2026, you probably would have assumed Jake would finish far ahead. But 10 years later, something unexpected happened. The man making far less somehow had more money, more options, and less stress. And the reason had almost nothing to do with intelligence. Because what separated these two men wasn't how much money they earned. It was what happened after the paycheck arrived. And that story says a lot about why millions of Americans making good incomes still feel like they're running harder every year without getting much farther. Jake had worked hard to reach 6 figures. After years of grinding in sales, his income had finally taken off. In early 2026, he received another strong year-end bonus and decided it was time to enjoy the success he had earned. He upgraded to a brand new Ford F-150 Platinum. It wasn't cheap, but almost everyone around him drove trucks, and monthly payments made it feel manageable. Soon after, he and his wife moved into a new construction home in a growing Charlotte suburb. The neighborhood had sidewalks, community pools, and families everywhere. It felt like progress. Then came the furniture, a new sectional from Ashley Furniture, a Blackstone grill for the backyard, patio furniture, a Peloton bike, a bigger television. None of it felt irresponsible. After all, Jake wasn't living beyond his means. He was simply upgrading his lifestyle to match his income. Every morning started with Starbucks. Busy workdays often ended with DoorDash. Amazon packages arrived several times a week. Every couple of years, there was a new iPhone. Summer vacations usually meant Disney World with the family. From the outside, Jake looked successful. And honestly, he was. Because nothing about Jake's decisions was crazy. He wasn't gambling. He wasn't making reckless bets. He was simply doing what millions of Americans do when their incomes rise. Meanwhile, Mike's life looked completely ordinary. He lived in Raleigh and still drove his paid-off Toyota Camry. He shopped at Costco and Aldi. Instead of replacing his phone every couple of years, he kept it until it stopped working. He used credit cards for rewards, but paid them off every month. His vacations were simpler. Instead of expensive resorts, he often took road trips through Tennessee, South Carolina, and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Nobody on Instagram envied his lifestyle. Nobody asked him financial questions. Nobody thought Mike was rich. And Mike didn't really care. Every payday, money quietly moved into places most people never saw. His company's 401, his Roth IRA, a Vanguard index fund account, an emergency savings account. Nothing exciting, nothing flashy, nothing worthy of social media. In fact, if you compared both men in 2026, almost everyone would have chosen Jake as the one who would become wealthy. And honestly, they would have had good reasons, because Jake earned far more. He lived in a nicer home. He drove a nicer vehicle. His lifestyle looked successful. Mike, on the other hand, looked average. But what neither man realized in 2026 was that over the next 10 years, their raises, habits, and everyday decisions would slowly begin pushing them toward two very different destinations. And at first, nobody noticed it happening. By 2027, both men were doing well. Jake's career continued to take off. His company had a strong year, and his commissions were better than ever. Between salary increases and bonuses, his income climbed to nearly $145,000. It felt incredible. For years, he had worked long hours, missed weekends, and chased quotas. Now, for the first time in his life, he felt like he was finally living the American dream. And honestly, he deserved to enjoy it. But something interesting happens when incomes rise. Life has a way of expanding with them. Jake and his wife upgraded some of the rooms inside their home. They replaced older furniture, remodeled part of the kitchen, and bought a second SUV for convenience. Streaming subscriptions multiplied. Netflix, Disney+, YouTube TV, Spotify, Amazon Prime, gym memberships, monthly software subscriptions. Small things, nothing outrageous, but they seemed to appear everywhere. The family started taking nicer vacations. Weekend trips became normal. Christmas spending grew larger every year. Birthdays became more elaborate. The couple joined a local country club because many of their friends were members. None of these decisions felt irresponsible. In fact, most people around him were living exactly the same way. And that's what made it feel normal. Meanwhile, Mike's life was changing too. His company promoted him to senior project manager. His salary increased from $85,000 to $95,000. Friends encouraged him to finally reward himself. After all, he had been driving the same Camry for years. His coworkers upgraded to luxury SUVs. One of his friends bought a BMW, another financed a new Tesla. And sometimes, Mike wondered if he was being too cautious. Maybe he should loosen up. Maybe he was sacrificing too much. But every time he received a raise, he made a simple decision. He increased his investments before increasing his lifestyle. A portion of every raise automatically flowed into his 401. He increased contributions to his Roth IRA. He added more money to his Vanguard S&P 500 fund. And because the transfers happened automatically, he rarely thought about them. Nothing about Mike's life looked impressive. His neighbors didn't think he was rich. His coworkers didn't think he was rich. Even Mike himself didn't think he was rich. Meanwhile, Jake's career kept moving upward. By 2029, his income crossed $160,000. On paper, he was winning. His home had appreciated, his truck looked beautiful, his family enjoyed vacations, his kids had everything they needed. But something strange was beginning to happen. Despite earning more money than ever, he never felt like he had extra money. Raises disappeared faster than he expected. Bonuses came and went, and every year seemed to introduce new expenses. Higher property taxes, higher insurance premiums, HOA increases, summer camps for the kids, maintenance around the house, unexpected repairs, medical bills, wedding gifts, flights, gas prices, groceries. Life simply became more expensive. And whenever Jake looked at his bank account, he couldn't understand one thing. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't irresponsible. He wasn't making stupid decisions. Yet somehow, it felt like he was running faster every year just to stay in the same place. Meanwhile, Mike's life still appeared ordinary. His income had risen to $105,000. He still shopped at Costco, still drove his Camry, still used the same coffee maker at home instead of buying Starbucks every morning. And to many people, his lifestyle looked boring. But beneath the surface, something invisible had started happening. His investments were no longer growing because of contributions alone. The money itself had started making money. Dividends were being reinvested. Compound growth was beginning to take over. And while nobody noticed it at the time, this quiet process would eventually become far more powerful than either man imagined. But before that happened, America itself was about to become much more expensive. And both men would feel the impact. By the early 2030s, something strange had happened across America. People who once thought making six figures would solve all their problems were beginning to ask the same question. Why does everything still feel so expensive? Groceries cost more, insurance cost more, eating out cost more, travel cost more. Property taxes climbed, homeowners insurance increased. Even everyday things people barely noticed before seemed to cost more every year, and both Jake and Mike felt it. But they felt it very differently. By 2031, Jake's income had reached nearly $180,000 a year. 10 years earlier, that number would have sounded unbelievable to him. Back in his 20s, he imagined that making that kind of money would mean complete financial freedom. Instead, he often felt stressed. His truck payment still existed. Insurance premiums had increased again. Property taxes on the house had gone up. HOA fees had risen. Summer vacations cost far more than they used to. Eating out with the family felt noticeably more expensive. Even simple trips to Target somehow ended up costing hundreds of dollars. His kids were getting older. Sports leagues, school trips, birthday parties, new clothes, unexpected expenses seemed endless. Sometimes, Jake would sit in the kitchen late at night, looking at his accounts and think, I make good money. Why does it never feel like enough? And millions of Americans watching this story probably understand that feeling. Because Jake wasn't broke, he wasn't irresponsible, he wasn't failing, but his life had become expensive. And expensive lifestyles require expensive incomes just to maintain themselves. Meanwhile, Mike was feeling inflation too. Groceries cost more in Raleigh, gas prices fluctuated, travel wasn't cheap, health insurance became more expensive. But there was one major difference. Mike had very few fixed payments, no car loan, no credit card balances, no monthly stress hanging over him. Years earlier, he had finally replaced his old Camry with another reliable Toyota, not because he had to impress anyone, but because the old one had simply reached the end of its life. He paid cash, and then moved on. His emergency fund had grown large enough that unexpected expenses rarely created panic. A broken appliance wasn't a crisis. A medical bill wasn't a disaster. When his company experienced layoffs in 2032, many employees panicked. Mike didn't. Because for years he had quietly built something most people couldn't see. Options. He had enough savings to survive, enough investments to continue growing, enough confidence to say no to bad opportunities, enough flexibility to walk away if necessary, and something else had begun happening. His investments were growing faster than his contributions. For years he had believed he was building wealth, but now he realized something strange. The money he had invested years ago was beginning to work harder than he was. Some months his accounts grew more than what he personally contributed. At first, it felt unreal, because nobody had taught him this in school. Nobody had celebrated it. Nobody posted pictures of compound growth on Instagram. And that's what made it so easy to miss. Meanwhile, Jake's life still looked more impressive. His house was beautiful. His truck turned heads. Family vacations looked amazing in photos. People admired his success. But inside, he often felt exhausted. Every promotion brought relief, and then more expenses. Every raise disappeared. Every bonus already had a destination. And one night, after reviewing his finances, Jake quietly said something millions of Americans have said to themselves. How do people making less money always seem to have more? He didn't know it yet, but he already knew one of those people. And over the next few years, the answer would become impossible to ignore. By 2034, both men had reached their 40s, and from the outside, Jake still looked like the obvious winner. His career had continued to grow. His income was now over $200,000 a year. The house had appreciated. The neighborhood had become one of the most desirable areas outside Charlotte. His family had made wonderful memories. The kids were growing up. Life looked good, and honestly, many parts of it were. But something had changed. Jake no longer chased promotions because he wanted them. He chased them because he felt like he needed them. His lifestyle had grown into something that required constant maintenance. The truck payment had eventually disappeared, but another vehicle replaced it. Insurance continued to rise. College savings for the kids became a major priority. Everything felt expensive, and despite earning more money than he ever imagined, he often wondered why financial peace still felt so far away. Meanwhile, Mike's life still didn't look particularly impressive. His neighbors didn't see anything unusual. His house wasn't the biggest. His clothes weren't designer. He wasn't posting luxury vacations online. In fact, many people would have guessed Jake was much wealthier, but they couldn't see what was happening behind the scenes. Years of automatic investing had quietly transformed his finances. His 401 had grown far larger than he expected. His Roth IRA had benefited from years of compound growth. His brokerage account had crossed milestones he once thought would take a lifetime. And perhaps most importantly, he had something Jake secretly envied: peace. When unexpected expenses appeared, Mike didn't panic. When markets fell, he stayed calm. When his company reorganized departments, he wasn't afraid. Because over the years, he had built something much more valuable than appearances. He had built options. The option to leave a bad job. The option to help family members. The option to take time off. The option to say no. And then something happened that surprised everyone. One Saturday afternoon, Jake and Mike met with several old friends for a barbecue. As they talked, somebody joked about how Mike always seemed relaxed. Another friend laughed and said, "Seriously, Mike, how do you always have money?" Everyone laughed, but Jake didn't, because he had quietly wondered the same thing. And then Mike said something simple. "I just never needed my life to look expensive." Nobody said anything for a moment, because deep down, everyone understood what he meant. Mike wasn't smarter. He hadn't invented a company. He hadn't won the lottery. He simply spent years buying assets while other people were buying appearances. And then something even more interesting happened. At 40 years old, Mike finally bought the dream car he had wanted since his 20s. Not because he wanted to impress anybody, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he genuinely wanted it. And this time he paid cash. No stress, no stretching the budget, no sacrificing his future. He smiled as he drove home. Because the dream itself had never been the problem. The timing had been. Meanwhile, Jake realized something important. For years, he had believed higher income automatically created wealth. But wealth wasn't measured by income. It wasn't measured by houses. It wasn't measured by vehicles. And it definitely wasn't measured by what strangers thought. Real wealth was measured by freedom, and for the first time in his life, Jake understood the difference. Because people with less money don't always end up with more, but people who need less often do. And in America, some of the wealthiest people you'll ever meet won't look wealthy at all. Because while some people spend years renting appearances, others spend years quietly buying freedom. And 10 years later, those two decisions become impossible to hide. The truth is, Jake's story isn't unusual, and neither is Mike's. In fact, versions of these two men exist in every city across America. In Phoenix, in Charlotte, in Dallas, in Nashville, in Atlanta, in Denver, and most of them are good people trying to do the best they can. Because this story was never about trucks, vacations, or nice homes. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the rewards of your hard work. There's nothing wrong with buying a dream car. There's nothing wrong with taking your family to Disney World or living in a beautiful neighborhood. The problem isn't spending money. The problem is believing that higher income automatically guarantees wealth. Because over the last several decades, millions of Americans have discovered something surprising. Making more money solves some problems, but it doesn't automatically create freedom. Freedom comes from margins. Freedom comes from having options. Freedom comes from needing less than you earn. And that's why two people can make completely different salaries and still end up with opposite results. One person spends raises as quickly as they arrive. The other quietly buys assets. One person's lifestyle grows faster than their income. The other person's investments grow faster than their lifestyle. And at first, nobody notices. Because wealth is strange. It grows silently. Nobody celebrates your emergency fund. Nobody compliments your Roth IRA. Nobody asks for pictures of your Vanguard account. Nobody posts compound interest on Instagram. In fact, some of the richest people in America look incredibly ordinary. They shop at Costco. They drive Toyotas. They wear simple clothes. And because they don't look rich, people assume they aren't. But appearances can be misleading. Because many things that look expensive are financed. Many things that look successful are borrowed. And many things that look wealthy are simply monthly payments. Meanwhile, true wealth often hides in places nobody can see. Inside retirement accounts. Inside brokerage accounts. Inside paid-off cars. Inside homes that people stayed in for decades. Inside habits repeated thousands of times. And maybe that is why so many Americans today feel confused. They look around and see people driving expensive cars, taking luxury vacations, and living incredible lifestyles. And they wonder if they're falling behind. But the truth is, you rarely see the whole picture. You don't see the debt. You don't see the stress. You don't see the sleepless nights. And you definitely don't see someone's net worth from their driveway. Which brings us back to Jake and Mike. Because, in the end, Jake wasn't a loser, and Mike wasn't a genius. They simply spent 10 years making different decisions. And eventually, those decisions started making a difference. Because wealth isn't what you show. It's what you keep. It's the ability to sleep peacefully. It's having choices. It's having time. It's being able to help the people you love. And perhaps the greatest financial flex in America isn't looking rich. It's never having to worry about money controlling your life. Because sometimes, the people with less money don't actually have more. They simply learn that needing less can give you everything. And that's a difference most people don't notice until it's too late. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. Because sometimes the people with less money don't actually have more. They simply learn that needing less can give you everything. And that's a difference most people don't notice until it's too late. So if you're interested in building wealth, understanding money, and making better long-term decisions, consider subscribing. Because the choices we make today often become the lives we live tomorrow. And I'll see you in the next one.